I've heard it recently from several ex-Adventists, and it sounded like this. Seventh-day Adventism rises and falls with the 2300-day prophecy, which explains why there's a good amount of debate popping up recently on some, but not all, ex-Adventist videos, and some, but not all, non-Adventist videos regarding the Adventist teaching regarding the 2300-day prophecy of Daniel. This prophecy is showing cracks, they say. It's false. It's ready to crumble. And today, we need to find out, have they already dropped the mic? Has the 2300-year interpretation of the 2300-day prophecy of Daniel 8 been debunked? Is Seventh-day Adventism collapsing right before our very eyes? Or are people ignoring the evidence that this interpretation is the most logical and reasonable? One of these options is true, and you'll have to decide for yourself based on the evidence. So, without further ado, let's jump right in. We need to start by understanding that what we are seeing isn't anything new. The battle over the prophecies of Daniel have been taking place for almost 2,000 years. This is clear from what Sir Isaac Newton had to say about the prophecies of Daniel 9. He says, "It is what is known as the prophecy of the 70 weeks, recorded in the 9th chapter. Perhaps no prophetic utterance in the Bible has attracted such attention and minute scrutiny. Since the time of the pagan Porphyry, believers and infidels innumerable have waged war around this 9th chapter of the book of Daniel. Porphyry was a pagan that tried to discredit Christianity by attempting to discredit the authorship of the book of Daniel. It is said of him that he especially attacked the prophecy of Daniel because Jews and Christians pointed to the historical fulfillment of its prophecies as a decisive argument. But these prophecies, he maintained, were not written by Daniel, but by some Jew who in the time of Antiochus Epiphanes gathered up the traditions of Daniel's life and wrote a history of recent past events, but in the future tense, falsely dating them back to Daniel's time. If you didn't catch that, it's basically saying that Porphyry tried to discredit Christianity by saying that Daniel is a book that was written after the events, and that it was not really prophetic at all, but a manufactured lie. This is because the prophecies of Daniel related to the Messiah were so accurate, and he wanted to discredit Christianity. The battle surrounding the book of Daniel is still going on today, and it will continue. But what we need to find out is if Seventh-day Adventists have a logical leg to stand on. Do the 70 weeks, and by connection, Daniel chapter 8 and 9 refer to literal days or prophetic years? Today, we're going to try to build a foundation to find out if the Seventh-day Adventist teaching regarding the 2300 days, 1844, and the cleansing of the heavenly sanctuary is false. Let me tell you why this is important. In Daniel chapter 8 verse 14, a claim is made by Daniel that I think we can all agree on. An angel speaks to Daniel and says, "Unto 2,300 days, then shall the sanctuary be cleansed." Very short, very clear. And this is what we know. Number one, there is a sanctuary. And number two, this sanctuary is going to be cleansed, which obviously means that whatever and wherever this sanctuary is, it has to be cleansed or cleaned. Then that means it must be pretty dirty. Or we could say that it is very defiled with something. Now, Daniel has no idea what's going on. He has no idea what any of this means, and he's not given the full interpretation of the dream. However, in chapter 9, the angel Gabriel shows up again, and he doesn't just come to chit-chat. He has a specific mission, which is to give Daniel, and I quote, "skill and understanding to understand the matter and consider the vision." Now, I'm not sure if you agree or disagree, but I'm confident that the vision that Gabriel is referring to is the one from the previous chapter, dealing with the 2300-day prophecy. So it's reasonable to conclude that whatever Gabriel is about to say is related to Daniel 8 verse 14 and the cleansing of the sanctuary. Now, we don't know what and where that sanctuary is yet. We just know that it needs to be cleansed and that what we are about to hear from Gabriel is connected with that. And this is how Gabriel makes that connection. He says that 70 weeks are determined upon thy people and upon thy holy city to finish the transgression and to make an end of sins and to make reconciliation for iniquity and to bring in everlasting righteousness and to seal up the vision and prophecy and to anoint the most holy. The first thing that Gabriel said was that 70 weeks are determined to do all of this work. Now, I know that your Hebrew may be a little rusty, but we need to find out what that word determined means. And a quick trip to blueletterbible.org will help us to do exactly that. This word means to divide, to determine, to be decreed, to be settled, to be marked out. So what are we talking about here? What is being marked out? What is being divided? To answer that question, I want to introduce you to my son. One of my son's favorite foods is pizza, with vegan cheese, of course. Anyway, whenever my wife makes pizza or we take a trip to Blaze Pizza, we each make our orders. I get thick crust, and my wife and my son each get a thin crust pizza. And like clockwork, this always happens. He eats all of his, and then he wants one of my slices. Now don't miss this. He wants a slice of my whole. He wants a slice to be divided, determined, and marked out for him. I hope you see where I'm going with this. He decrees and settles that a slice of the whole thick crust pizza is for him. This is exactly what Gabriel is doing. He's telling Daniel that a slice of the 2300 days is just for the children of Israel. God is going to focus his energies on continuing to work through them as a people to work for the salvation of humanity. He's going to divide, determine, mark out, decree, and settle that 70 weeks of days is going to be especially dedicated to the Jews as a nation. And the last time I checked, if a week has 7 days, then that means we are talking about 490 days. As I already mentioned in our last episode, we looked at a quote by Sir Isaac Newton, and we saw his writings on the book of Daniel, specifically referring to Daniel 9, verses 24 to 27. And he believed that what we are about to read is the, quote, keystone of the edifice of the Christian religion. Now, Isaac Newton was a pretty smart guy, way smarter than I am. So let's read what he read to find out why he believed what he believed. And let's really focus in and see why he was so passionate about these verses. It says, "Know therefore and understand from the going forth of the commandment to restore and to build Jerusalem unto Messiah the Prince shall be 7 weeks and 62 weeks, which is the old way of saying 62 weeks. That the street shall be built again, and the wall even in troublous times. And after 62 weeks shall Messiah be cut off, but not for himself. And the people of the prince that shall come shall destroy the city and the sanctuary, and the end thereof shall be with a flood. And unto the end of the war desolations are determined. And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease. And for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." All right, I get it. That was a lot, and it can sound very confusing, but it's not if you break it down. This is how I tell my son to study the Bible. Read the verse and stop at every punctuation mark, and don't move forward until you understand what you just read. Now, I don't have time today to review it in that format, but here are the main points. Number 1, there's going to be a decree to restore and build Jerusalem. Number 2, it says that 7 weeks and 2 weeks later, the Messiah was supposed to show up. Number 3, the streets of Jerusalem will be built again in troublous times. Number 4, the Messiah is going to be cut off or killed. Number 5, in the last week of this prophecy, the sacrifices of the Jewish sanctuary would come to an end. It's evident that Sir Isaac Newton looked at this and then he asked himself a question. When did Jesus announce his messiahship? When did he die? And it is obvious that he came to the conclusion that Jesus died in the middle of the year 31 AD and announced his messiahship 3.5 years earlier in the year 27 AD, when Jesus said, "The time is fulfilled. The kingdom of God is at hand. Repent ye and believe the gospel." Now here's the question that we need to ask ourselves, and everything hinges on this. These 69 weeks until the Messiah shows up, are they literal weeks or prophetic weeks? If they're literal, then the logical conclusion is that those literal 69 weeks would add up to around a year and 4 months, which would mean that we should see a command to restore and rebuild Jerusalem in or around 26 AD. But we don't see a decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem in or around 26 AD. We don't see walls and streets being built in troublous times in 26 AD, leading up to Jesus' announcement in 27 AD. But this is what we do see. We do see decrees in the book of Ezra regarding the temple and Jerusalem. We do see Jerusalem being rebuilt in troublous times in the books of Ezra and Nehemiah. And so it's evident that these are the decrees that Sir Isaac Newton understood to be the starting date for when the Messiah would arrive. The only logical conclusion that I can come to is that the 69 weeks and 70 weeks are not literal weeks. That would be completely irrational. And the only other logical conclusion that I can come to is that if the 70 weeks, also known as the 490 days, are marked out or divided from the 2300 days, then that must mean that the 2300 days are not literal days either. Sir Isaac Newton understood this. He understood that we are talking about prophetic years and not literal years. He said as much in his book on Daniel, where he wrote, "By the common consent of all scholars of the Bible, believers and unbelievers alike, the 70 weeks or 490 days are accepted as days of years." And now it's time for a disclaimer. I am not saying that Isaac Newton taught the 2300-day prophecy. I'm just saying that he believed the day-for-year principle as it relates to the 70 weeks. Isaac Newton obviously read the books of Ezra and Nehemiah, and the story of the building of the walls and the streets in troublous times, when men like Sanballat were scheming and plotting to interfere with the rebuilding of the temple and Jerusalem. Newton was a mathematician that simply did the math to find out when the decree to rebuild Jerusalem would have been made. Then he calculated from there, and it's very simple. 69 weeks times 7 days equals 483 years. In 457, the decree is made, and then 483 years later, the Messiah shows up and announces his messiahship by saying the time is fulfilled. And 3.5 years later, in the middle of the last 490 weeks, he's crucified, or like the prophecy said, he's cut off. If the prophecy is true, then in 457, we have to find a decree to rebuild and restore Jerusalem. There's something else there in the book of Ezra that is completely logical and gives us a clear answer to the 457 BC starting date. And it gives us a valid reason to believe that the 490-year prophecy started in 457 BC. And if this is true, then the door will be wide open for the 2300-year prophecy. And maybe, just maybe, Seventh-day Adventism can still stand. And in our next video, former presidential candidate Herman Cain and Ezra himself is going to help us figure out the secret to understanding how to confidently settle on the historical fact that in 457 BC, King Artaxerxes did indeed issue a decree to rebuild Jerusalem, and Ezra followed the order of that decree by going back to Jerusalem to join Nehemiah to lead out in the rebuilding of the city, even in troublous times. You're not going to want to miss the next one. If you want to join this community of people seeking to reboot Adventism and getting a firm foundation for their faith, then don't forget to subscribe and share these videos with others. And if you've been blessed by this ministry, check the description below if you'd like to support us in our work. And don't forget, everyone has a reason for what they believe, but not everyone has a valid reason. Hope to see you again. God bless.